one argument that we didn't get to last time. If you remember, Nozick presents his argument fairly quickly and breezily. He thinks his theory is a pretty straightforward theory, and so he doesn't spend too much time elaborating it. It's 3 principles, and he thinks the principles are pretty intuitive. We have a general sense of what they would look like. Of course, the devil is in the details, but he's mainly interested in positing it as a kind of theory that is a challenge to the dominant way in which he sees philosophers deal with distributive justice questions. That's why he starts by the whole chapter by challenging the way we think about justice. Right? He says distributive justice is not a neutral term. He says. So I ask you to think about that. So what he does is he outlines his theory in a couple of pages, and then he starts contrasting it with what he thinks are the problems that appear once you accept the alternative. Right? So he says you have to accept 1 or 2 ways to think about this. In an end state, you have to think about theories of justice as end state theories that look at patterns or overall distributions. Things ought to be distributed in accordance with blank. Right? He has this phrase, this sentence, this slogan-y thing that he says. From each according to their blank to each according to their blank. That's a slogan by which you can order various theories of justice. He thinks that actually is it's a bad slogan, because the slogan already, you see this argument repeat a couple of times, so he thinks this way of phrasing the question already assumes something that is not clearly true, because it assumes that distribution is the game, right? From people to people. That's what justice is about. He thinks that's not what justice is about. It's not what other people can expect me to give them or what we ought to move around between us. He thinks justice is really about a process. And so if you think about justice as a process, then you have to accept not this end state theory, but a historical theory. The historical theory looks at was the process actually followed, or was it violated? So, the arguments then are a variety of problems that appear with end state theories. The Will-Chamberlain theory is supposed to show how any end state theory will have to allow for some type of process of exchange, unless you want to prohibit exchange altogether, but that's a really unattractive situation, right? That means everyone has to just survive on whatever they can gather for themselves, or whatever they might be given, but then they have to sit still with whatever they're given by the government or something. Right? If you allow any type of exchange, then you're introducing process elements into your theory. He says as soon as you allow a little bit of process to seep in your end state theory, the whole end state theory explodes, basically. That's the Will-Chamberlain example, right? No matter what pattern you accept, allow people to exchange, boom, the whole pattern gets messed up. Just wait for it. Right? Happens pretty fast. Just need a couple of seasons of Will-Chamberlain playing ball, that's it. So that's, those are the types of arguments he's giving you. So like, look, accept end state theories, really, really problematic things start following. You have to start prohibiting capitalist acts between consenting adults, or you have to constantly interfere with people's freedom, and so on. The other one is, he thinks there's a tension between this type of end state theory and the redistribution that it requires, and property rights or freedom. And so this is a kind of notorious argument, I guess. Although I'm not sure I've ever seen someone really rebut it. But anyway, he thinks the implication is that when we have redistributive taxation of earnings from labor, that really is just like forcing people to work. Like it's like a mild form of slavery, right? That's what forced labor. It's kind of like the people back in the day who were like prisoners who were forced to like chop, get a pick and then make rocks from big rocks into small. That's really terrible, right? And he says, well, this actually, morally speaking, it's on a par. There's a footnote where Nozick in he has his enigmatic moments. And he says, I'm not sure if it's actually the same or on a par with. And I don't really follow why. So like, anyway, makes me, when I read it, I end up scratching my head thinking, like, what triggered him to write that? But I can't figure out what, anyway. I'm not sure what the difference is, but what makes you think about what does he mean by on a par, right? If it doesn't mean is forced labor, then what, anyway. It's one of the reasons why Nozick is stimulating, I think. But so, he thinks taxation of earnings from labor is on a par with forced labor. Does anyone remember the argument? If so, you want to try and summarize it for me? Yeah, Dominic?
So if you take X amount of dollars for somebody working X amount of hours, it's as if you're taking those hours from that person that they're working for free. And if somebody's working for free, then we tend to call that slavery. So taxation is the form of slavery.
Yeah, good. So it's like you're taking someone's labor from them, away from them, extracting their labor, if you will, right? Without their permission, right? Because taxation is not, it's not a normal transfer, right? It's not a sale, it's not a gift, right? It's a taking. And he says, well, we know what that is, right? Like it's somebody is now forced to work for something they didn't choose to work for, and then that's forced labor, right?
I'm not sure how I necessarily feel about the comparison. Not just because it could be like, what's the word? Not just because it seems like maybe extreme, but it just seems like with forced, there's tremendous moral differences between forced labor and taxation. Because, yeah, even at a 100% tax rate, and I'm not at all advocating for a 100% tax rate. You're just extracting 100%.
Thanks for clarifying that.
But if the person chose to stop working, knowing it's stopping them from stopping the working, that's the difference between forced labor and taxation. You can stop working, and no one is preventing you from exercising that right if it quits. Meanwhile, if it's forced labor, then someone could beat you, someone could torture you, someone could kill you. But I don't really hear about people getting beat, tortured, or killed over a rate in taxation. So it seems to me as if he's sort of pulling a fast one on us. It sounds good because it's like, yeah, you take those hours, okay, yeah, that's forced labor, that's similar to slavery, but not quite there yet. Sorry.
Yeah, the argument has this effect, this is a funny effect where some large number of people see it sort of go for the eye roll. And then another number of people who read it say like, yeah, exactly. And then there's very few people in between. Right? So you might be in the eye roll camp, but you're in good company is my point. I'll get back to the argument you just made, but.
And based on what you were saying, it seems like if it was 100% tax rate though, assuming all the jobs are that way, it's not like you have the option to like, oh, I can quit my job, but I can't start a job where I'm not 100% working for someone other than myself. Right. That's the problem, I think. Because it is better than like slavery, because obviously you could get out, but there's nowhere else to get back in, so to speak.
Right.
I get the effects.
Yeah, Nozick has a brief. I'm trying to see if I can find it quickly here. He has a footnote, I think, somewhere where he says.
That quote in my book is on page 169. That's where the footnote is.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking he actually addresses Cameron's point about, well, you could always stop, and so it's not really forced. He says, well, it's kind of cute for my opponents to say this, right? Because, no offense, but this is sort of the tone he's striking. He says, because these are also the people who often say that the worker in the capitalist economy is forced to work for the terms that the employer will set for him. But of course, the same thing goes, right? Well, he can just not work, but that's not good enough for them, right? So if we see coercion whenever your alternative is really crappy, not in the Hobbesian sense, right, where you're coerced only if you physically don't have the option open to you, but if we think coercion is something like when there's some undue pressure put on you to accept it, something. Thinks, well then, that seems to be what these Rawlsians are all accepting, right? They're always appealing to this. But so, well, if you think that, then you cannot object to my view that taxation is forced labor on the grounds that, well, you can just not work. So, well, the cost of not working is really pretty high because it's going to be either just whatever, depending on whatever the government welfare system might give you, or if there is no such thing, destitution. Right?
Yeah, but I feel like the taxing is just like maybe a partial property holding. I'm not saying whether or not that's right or wrong, but I feel that type of argument seems a little bit more convincing to me than comparing it to forced labor. Maybe it's theft, but maybe not forced labor.
I have heard the theft one a lot. Like that's like a common meme online. It's like taxation is theft or whatever. So I've seen that a lot lately.
Okay.
That's the kind of the cost of living that you want
Yeah, that's interesting. So you might think that living in a certain type of house implies or is tacit consent, to use Locke's term, to being taxed a certain way. Is that the idea?
Maybe. I don't know if that holds a lot of water, but
Can anyone think of what Nozick might reply to this? So like the idea is sort of like this is the cost of having a nice house, right? So like simplifying a little what you're saying, but that's to put it in a phrase.
Well, he kind of draws the example of a movie ticket versus going outdoors. So like, why should the person who wants to enjoy having a nice house be at the mercy of higher tax rates than somebody who enjoys living in a tent? Like, why should, just because they have that desire and passion, why should it be subjected to higher tax rates or whatever?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the way that's the way that Nozick would respond. To put another, I'm trading in slogans apparently today, but here's another slogan to put. I think what he would say is something like, well, you already paid for your house, right? It was the thing that you paid, it was the cost of buying the house. So when you paid the price of the house, that was the price of living in a nice house. Now the tax comes on, so we're doing a double counting thing, right? We're saying, well, I already charged you, and now I'm charging you again, like here's the bill the second time. And that's not what we're being charged. When we're charging you, especially when it's redistributive taxation, you're not charging me for my house, you're charging me for somebody else's house or somebody else's. Maybe that's important, maybe not, but it's not the cost of my house, right?
what if it wasn't a house specifically? What if it was just like, if I want to make this amount of income, then this is going to be the cost that comes with wanting to make that type of income?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely the terms that the tax man, to put it that way, is giving you, right? Saying, well, if you want to make a certain amount of money, you have to pay X amount of tax over it. I guess what Nozick's trying to say is he's saying, yeah, I know that's what they do say, right? The question is, do they have a right to say that? And so I think his point here is, well, when I look at it at first, it looks like what they're doing is they're forcing me to work for whatever they want, right? Whatever they're going to do with the taxes. And do they have a right to do that? Well, sometimes surely yes, if you consent to it, right? If for example, your employer does the same thing, right? Your employer could pay you more, but doesn't pay you as much maybe as he could possibly pay you. So there's a deal where you give them labor in exchange for money, but fair enough, as Nozick says, you've consented to that. But if you didn't consent to the government taxing you, and they just come and they don't ask for you, they don't wait for your consent, right? They're just coming. Then he says, well, I'm working, you're taking. Right? That means, it seems that you're forcing me to work for your, it's at least similar on a par, whatever that might mean, with.
It kind of, could it kind of depend on what the taxation is going towards? Like, I remember in high school, one of my professors got really upset because he found out some of the taxes were going towards like a convention where there are $7 muffins, and it's like, okay, well that taxing is really dumb, like you're just taking my money. But what if the taxing goes to like building the roads or having people build the roads, and then you need to use those roads? So would that be tacit consent? Would that really be forced labor if you need to use those roads?
I'm sure Nozick would agree that there are better and worse ways of using, right? But I think ultimately the point is going to be, I mean, let's say that we had like 160 some years ago, a little more. Can't be long enough. When slavery still existed, right? Instead of having them do like cotton plantations and so on, we just made them do roads, and we said, well, these roads are really useful. I mean, it's better than lining your pockets with the cotton trade, I'm sure, if you do I prefer that if you're gonna do it, I prefer that you build roads for everyone than you're just making money for yourself. But that's sort of going from like the most horrific to the most horrific with not even a silver lining, whatever the lining might be, like tin lining or something, right? Where really we shouldn't be deciding between horrific and horrific, right? But we should be deciding between let's not do that anymore and let's do the right thing, right? And I think that's going to be his point here too. He thinks, well, if I'm right, Nozick would say, if I, Nozick, am right, that taxation is like forced labor, then it doesn't really matter what you use it for, right? Because you shouldn't be forcing me, period. the party line of the book, so right, the stated view is this. You can be taxed for the minimal state, what he calls the minimal state, which is really only the police, the law, the courts, prisons, and maybe some national defense. That's it. And he has a very long, the whole first part of the book is, and the first part of the book does not read as breezily as the part that we're reading. And the part we're reading isn't always as breezy as you might want it to be. So it's a very dense and complicated argument where he tries to, yeah. It's very interesting, like people discuss it still. That's the part that's discussed more than the second part in the literature today. But it's, anyway, he has a very complicated argument for why he thinks people can be generally taxed for the minimal state. But nothing more. Right? So your roads, your hospitals, your clean water plant, like your water filtration things, all these things, whatever, like this thing right here, uncg, right? Like, no taxation for that. In Utopia, the third part, right, which also we don't read, he says it comes from people. So we're looking mostly at the argument which is supposed to be the justice part, and then he has a speculation about, well, where does it come from if we do put justice in its place? And he thinks companies will make it for profit, philanthropists will give money, who make a lot of money through their companies. People together will pitch in and organize it as a community and so on. He thinks there'll be, once we stop forcing people all to do sort of to live by this uniform way, there'll be all sorts, let 1,000 flowers bloom is his idea. Right? And he thinks lots of flowers will bloom and there's your stuff. So practically speaking, how will roads come about? Well, we already talked to Dominic and Jorge about this a couple of days ago. We already know that you don't need taxes to pay for roads, called toll roads. Right? So you can have companies that build toll roads and then charge people for the use of it. Some people might volunteer things. So like lifeguards often are volunteer, or not volunteer, but like voluntarily funded. So they run on voluntary donations and so on. Hospitals, well, they'll be made for profit probably. Right? Thinks very likely this will work pretty well. And he has some arguments for why you would think that it would work pretty well. He thinks there's going to be pressures for these things working very well because people will be free to choose to opt for the ones that offer a good deal at a low price. And so that's going to, the competition will work its magic and so on. But that's sort of where it's going to, you might not believe this, but that's his view, right? Yeah. Cameron?
So he doesn't go all the way to like anarcho-capitalism, does he?
No, it's without anarcho-capitalism without the anarcho part. But it's as close as you can get there without actually getting there. Very quickly, he thinks if you have anarchy, people will start buying police services from private organizations like security companies or something. And he thinks, well, once you have all these competing security companies, it's in everyone's interest to kind of deal with the same one. And so there's a natural monopoly. You get sort of one that will outcompete all the other ones. Then you have a few crazy people sort of wandering around who might not go, and here's where the argument gets really convoluted or complicated. And he thinks, well, but you can force those into the one dominant security company, and then, well, that seems like forcing them, like in the way that he objects to. Yeah, but he says, well, these are exceptions where if you compensate them enough, it's okay. And the compensation then is, well, it's the protection they get from the security company. So then that's fine. That's, if you feel like it, we can, we can go into it, but it'll take a long time. But that's the argument. So then he thinks, well, that's the minimal state. And then the rest of the book is really him showing anything more than the minimal state is going to be unjust. Because it's going to be coercive in ways that's unacceptable. Part of the complication is that if you accept the compensation part of the first, it's not entirely clear why you can't make similar compensation type arguments here, right? So maybe that's what you had in mind. Well, you're getting taxed, but you're also getting amply compensated by, and so how would he stop it? Well, he doesn't tell you, and so his critics have been pretty harsh on him, saying, well, how do those two things fit together? And it's just not clear if they fit together. But if they don't fit together, then maybe he should be anarcho-capitalist. Right? Maybe he should say, well, here's the theory. This theory from part 2 is the right theory, and so give up on the state altogether. You know, we're getting more and more radical, of course, but there you go. Either way, if you don't want to be that radical, you're going to have to find a way of resisting these type of arguments, right? So he's trying to say something that seems sort of hysterical, right? Or exaggerated. But then, yeah, I'm not sure. Well, here's a version of the argument that leads him to it. So suppose that you would earn a certain amount A in return for your labor if there were no taxation. Like say you come work for me, right? I say, here's the amount A I'm willing to pay for your work. $15 an hour, let's say. Right? Now you're taxed to the tune of amount B, right? So then you make A minus B, that's C, right? C. So let's say you get taxed for $3 an hour, you make $12, right? So if there were no taxation, you would make $15 because that's what I'm willing to spend. But now, after taxation, you only make 12. Right? So the $3 has gone away. So Nozick's point is if people like labor to acquire some amount, whatever it might be, the 15 or the 12, right, A or C, then they do that for some purpose P. They have a reason why they want to, right? You don't just work for no reason whatsoever. You work for a particular, like you want to do something with that money, right? Give it to your mom, save for this private education that now is going to be part of this Nozickian world, right? It's going to get expensive. Whatever it might be, you have a purpose for this money. It says, however, the purpose Q, that's a different purpose, not your purpose, right? Of the amount B, that's the taxed amount, right? Is not set by you, the individual laborer, right? So I'm the tax man, you're the worker. I tax you for a certain amount, so I'm going to build roads with it or something. Like that's my purpose, but it wasn't yours. Even if it's the same one, I'm the one who's setting it, right? So it's not, like they might overlap even our purposes, but you're not the one who's setting it. I'm the one who's setting that purpose. And so then, right, therefore, if someone gains C, so that's the $12, right, after taxation, in return for your labor, then that labor did not serve P, but P plus Q, right? So you worked for $15 an hour, basically, but you only got 12. And so your labor served 12 plus 3 equals the $15, right? And you had saved for college, and I had built roads, and so your labor now served not just your purpose, which was going to college, but going to college, and my purpose, building roads, right? So that, I think, is what's going on here. And you can complete it like this. If you are free, right, as a free person, so hence the connection or the tension with freedom, if you're free and not a forced laborer, then you get to set your own purposes. Right? The free laborer gets to decide what they work for. The slave is not free, it's forced. It's the most forced, the most unfree worker, because the slave never gets to decide what they work for. The master decides this. Even when the master says, hey slave, you decide what you do today, it's the master's decision that the slave gets to decide what, right? So that's not freedom. The free person doesn't have to ask a master for permission. Right? The free person makes up their own mind. And so if you're free, then you set the purpose of your own labor, and so therefore under taxation, people are not free but forced labor, or at least partially, right? To the tune of amount B, right? That's you're forced and non-free. That's kind of the argument, I think. And so Nozick mentions at one point, this is the only point I think in the book where he really talks about it, he says, this kind of taxation is a way of seeing people not as self-owners, but as partially owned by others. Some of his critics have really jumped on that phrase, self-owners, but there it is. He thinks a free person, right, is someone, like a slave is not free because they're owned by someone else. He says, and so like the denial of this is, not someone else owns you, but you own you. And if you own you, you get to decide how you are used. And taxation interferes with that. That's basically the idea. All right, you see how this might go? Do you have any worries about this? You see any objections, like things that you think are going wrong here? Okay.
I don't know if this one's in one, but it seems that if people are serving not only their purpose, but other people's
And so why should I care about that? If I'm a self-owner, right? So.
Because, I mean, it seems that if a person is only working for their purpose and their purpose only, and they're their own self-serving person, then it just reminds me a little bit of talking about the state of nature, where you're only focused about what you can do for yourself, and if you try to mess with that, then you're gone. But if you are working for your purpose as well as someone else's purpose, and that person is working for their purpose and someone else's purpose, then in turn, all of you are connected, which means you are less likely to maybe fall apart in the state because you are so deeply interconnected. You can, like, criticize that because I don't even know if it's like,
Well, you're not alone in having this thought, for sure. Here's a popular version of what you're thinking. I think you're thinking. It's one I don't find particularly compelling, but I'm a minority. So the popular version is the one. This is something that feminists, for example, have raised, or communitarians, people who think that communities are more important. The claim is this type of thinking is sort of very gratingly individualist. Right? It's really thinking about yourself as separate from everybody else, and you are none of my business, and please leave me alone. Type of philosophy. It has that type of feel, right? And sorry.
which is okay. I don't want it to sound like I'm buddy.
Oh, okay. Well, but there's a standard view, right? There's a quite popular view, I think, at least among philosophers, that this. I don't think it's a majority view, but there's a good chunk of smart people who've said things like this. You think, well, that's a mistaken way to think about it. Go all the way back to Aristotle, for example, if you know about Aristotle. Aristotle thinks people are inherently, in their essence, social human beings. Right? If you remember, all the way in the beginning of term, Simmons talks about this. If you think that we're essentially social, then you might think we're essentially sort of connected with one another. And this way of thinking about it as, my life is my business, and you have no say whatsoever over it. But there's sort of a firewall around every individual person. Doesn't really fit that picture well, right? The way that people who are friends of Nozick's would reply is usually saying, no, I'm not saying that you should just isolate yourself from it. Your purpose can be anything. It can be, I take care of my friends, my family. It can be, you can take care of the whole society, of all of humanity. The key point is, who gets to decide, right? And so we say every individual person gets to decide for themselves. But yeah, a good life would be a life that you live together and not just in isolation and so on. And they would often say, well, if you want people to truly live together and have meaningful connections, then you have to let them choose to enter into these connections, because forced connections aren't as good as the voluntary free ones. So, right. That's a way to respond. But it's a popular charge. A slightly different version, this is one that I think holds more water. Although again, I'm a minority about my view of, well, it's perfectly reasonable to deny my resistance to the first version of your point. But here's the one that I think personally, whatever it's worth, holds more water. You might think that you're not completely free to choose your own purposes, come what may. Right? Everybody, including Nozick, accepts that there are limits to whatever your purpose P might be. So the purpose P of enslave the rest of mankind, right? That's ruled out, right? Because it violates other people's rights. Okay, well, if people have a right that I don't enslave them, right? I'm required to have a purpose of non-enslaving. Then maybe there are other requirements that they have, right? And so someone like Rawls might say, yeah, here is another purpose. One, non-enslaving. That's a good beginning, but it's not the whole story, right? There's some other stuff, which is make sure that other people are not poor, or in Rawls's case, make sure that the poor are as well off as they could possibly be. Right? The point is, when we represent it like this, we're not telling the full story, right? Like any view, including Nozick's, would require that this purpose P is not a variable that's completely open, right? It's not anything goes in here. There are limits to what can go in here. But if there are limits that can go in here, then we're already talking about P plus some type of Q, right? Which is not enslaving people, not murdering people, not stealing their stuff, and so, right? So QU. Then the question is just how many things are we adding, right? And if we're asking how many things are we adding, then this forced labor thing is just kind of becomes a little more puzzling, right? Because we're supposed to, I mean, we're already forced in our labor not to kill people, right? That's a work, that's for people, that's a form of doing labor, right? I mean, you have to use your body in ways to expend energy in order to kill a person. So don't do it in a form like use it in a way that is non-killing, right? Use it in a way that is non-stealing. Use it in a way, right? These are ways in which you're forced to work by even Nozick's own rights system. So use it to leave other people alone. Use your energy in ways that leaves their stuff alone. Maybe use it in ways that make sure that they have enough stuff. Right? For this to really be a good wedge, you have to show that there is some sort of difference in kind when we jump from the first to the last one. Right? Really a totally different thing. So I think that's maybe why people like Cameron would think he's pulling a fast one, right? Like, in some sense, all labor is forced by this formula. Or if it's not, we need to hear why not, right? Like this is not the argument that's doing it. Did that? I'm wondering if I went too fast, but keep going.
In a sense, even if the government is not forcing you directly to work, you're forced to work to survive. So I don't know. Maybe something about the phrase forced labor that's bothering me. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, so I'm trying to avoid some of those worries by putting it in this purposes point, right? Like saying, well, if you're going to work, then you get to choose why, like for what reason you work, or for what goals are being served by your labor. I think most people who are friends of Nozick would say something like, yeah, there is a big difference between, notice how we've described it, not killing, not stealing, like not duping people, not harming them, right? These are all just these are things you can do perfectly fine by just sitting at home and not going anywhere, right? But then there's a further one, which is do take care of others, right? Well, you can't do that. Now you have to actually start working. That's going to be the difference. Right? But it's hard to make that really precise. All right, keep going. Yeah. He has a nice question where he really puts this sort of in stark relief. He says, look, if it's not okay to force people who are unemployed to work for the needy, so if people choose not to work, why is it not okay to force them to work to provide for the poor? He says, well, we can't force them to work. So it's like, okay, well, if we can't force them to work for the needy, then why is it okay to force those people who are already working to work for the needy? I think that's a slightly more interesting way of posing the question. Do you have a thought about it, Terry?
No. What you said about P and not killing and not stealing actually goes back to what she asked originally. It depends on the purpose.
The roads thing and stuff?
What's a legitimate exercise of state power? And
right.
you need to premise that it's at least a legitimate exercise of state power to protect rights.
Right, in which case we're assuming what the argument is supposed to establish. Yeah. So we're asking like what are the actual purposes that we can be forced to respect? And if not killing is one of them, then we need to hear why working for the needy is not among them. And that's the thing. That's the thing we're looking for, and the argument isn't quite. So this actually I think is a nicer way of raising the problem, right? He thinks, well, if you think it's okay to force people who are working to not kill and serve the needy, right? Like, why is it not okay to force people who are not working to not kill, which we do that already with the police, right? But also to force them to work for the needy. Like, why don't we put them in just labor camps? Right? By the same argument. That's a little more challenging.
They choose to work for Q, but when the Q is taken out, or when the money is taken out, they don't get to choose where that money goes, and that's what makes it bad. But
yeah, I think so. But that's the problematic version of the argument, right?
Because then, like, if you don't get to choose, a, like, I don't know how to phrase this question, so maybe I should have saved the line, but like, makes me think like of the consent again, like kind of like Kim was saying about the survival, like you don't choose to this world, but you're kind of forced to survive in it, and in order to survive, you have to
Right.
like.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, so good. I think what the thrust of that argument, where it really gets us, if it has any power, where it gets its power, is like, what's the source of the forcing, right? So the source of the forcing can be nature, which is like the laws of nature, such that if you want to continue to survive, like biochemically, stuff needs to get in there, right? So, and that's like, so you need to get that stuff in there. Like that's one. That's a forcing. But who's doing that? Well, I'm saying nature, but nature is just shorthand for chemical processes, right? Like so we're talking sort of metaphorically here. Now, if it's you, right? If you're putting a gun to my head and say, "Get me some food because I'm hungry," that's a different story, right? So now we're talking about a forcing that's quite different. And so I think Nozick is trying to say, well, yeah, sure, that hunger might force you to eat, or it might force you to get something to eat. That's one thing, but it's quite another when somebody else comes, or a group of people united in the state, or right, come by and say, I'm going to force you to build some roads or to pay for some roads here. So here's the question, right? He says, well, if you think that's okay to ask of the people who already have jobs, why is it not also okay to ask of the people who don't have jobs?
Okay, to exclude those who, the people who are employed and they have the top part of it, then what makes it okay for them to not?
Sorry, the people who are...
I don't know. I'm just getting into like thinking of like middle class, upper class, lower class, and like you don't force the unemployed to work for the needy, and you don't really force the top part to work for the needy, but then the people who are just
Why don't we force the top part to work for needy?
I don't know.
They get taxed.
I don't know what I'm talking about.
Okay, because they get taxed the heaviest, right? Okay. Yeah, most, well, I don't know. Depends how you look on it, I guess. There are these notorious stories of people who have a lot who pay very little.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, if you break down the total expenses of the total annual revenue of the U.S. government, and you see like who pays for it, it's something like, I think something like 70-some% is paid by the top 10% income, because they. Sorry? Yeah, well, so it depends how you slice it. Now, point being, depending on how you look at it, some people who, in some ways of looking at it, the people who make a lot pay for a lot too. And in those cases, the exceptions maybe not, but in those cases at least, Nozick would say, well, these people are forced to do a lot of stuff, right? So, assuming you find this forceful. Yeah. All right. So, just to summarize this, right? So, Nozick thinks redistribution must, so just by what it is, right, is inconsistent with property and therefore with people being free. And so here are some quotes, right? So, pattern principles allow people to choose to expend on themselves, but not upon others. So we've seen that before. He thinks this is really weird, because if you're supposed to be free, then you're supposed to choose to work for others as much as you work for yourself. It's individualism with a vengeance. He's addressing the type of feminist or communitarian person here, right? So like, look, you think I'm the one who's the stark individualist? You don't allow people to to benefit others, right? And, like, you start undoing it when I'm not benefiting the right people in your mind. So. He thinks here such views mean the redistributive ones. He says families have to be disturbing. Within a family, there are all sorts of transfers that disrupt your favorite pattern. And this is true, right? These actually, like most left-wing people who favor all sorts of redistribution, they have lots of problems with the family. They don't like it when parents leave their kids money. They would like to tax this away. Right? They don't like it when parents are very successful in setting their kids up to get a good education, because this, is supposed to be not equal opportunity. So these are things that you maybe think are right, but Nozick is saying, well, wait a minute. I thought families were a good thing, and taking care of your kids were a good thing. Like, this is a symptom of a deeper problem. Agree or not, right? But that's he's trying to say, look, this is kind of freedom that we're losing when we go for redistribution. He has a footnote where he says, hey, the difference principle makes no sense. You know why it makes no sense? Even when people are super close and loving and like really share a life and a purpose together, the difference principle still is not the right principle. Like, it's too demanding, even within the family, to always make sure that the one who's least well off within the family is doing the best they could possibly expect to do. So, well, if it's not okay for in a family, why on earth would you think it's okay in a society? It's nothing like a family. Right? So, he thinks these are ways you can see the problem sort of through the cracks. Right? And so here the last one. This is a nice one too. It's about this is basically an analogy of the one when like why don't we force the unemployed to work? It says, look, let's ask. Might a person emigrate from a country that has institutionalized some type of patterned principle? Right? Let's say if you have a very egalitarian country and you're forced to work for the needy. Can that person leave? Right? Hopefully the answer is yes, he thinks. Right? Like it better be yes or your theory is in trouble. It's starting to look very much like an extremely repressive theory. He says, but if you say yes, then what kind of story is this, right? What kind of story allows you to escape this redistribution by emigrating, but not escape it by just staying? Right? Like, why is emigration the price of opting out of this redistributive scheme? Or by alternative, might you just kidnap people in other countries who aren't doing their part and then bring them back here and then start like, we have some needy here and you have some money, let's go. Right? So you think, you see what he's doing, right? His mind is spinning and he's churning, he's thinking, okay, well, if we really take seriously the idea that some people just have to work for others, forcing them to labor, what does that really mean? Well, why not force the unemployed to work? Why not stop people from leaving if they are very good providers for others? Why not bring good providers here by force? Like, we're forcing it, right? Like, he's trying to say, well, we're kind of complacent about one form of forcing, but all the other ones disrupt our minds. And he thinks, well, if we're consistent, we should accept that the one that we're complacent about, which is just taxing the rich or something, that's just as bad, he thinks. Right? Families, just as, if you like the family, then you should not like these redistributive measures because they put pressure on the family, and so on. All right. Done and done. Any questions about this? Let you chew on it. Yeah. Lots of Nozick's this is a standard thing that Nozick does in this book, by the way. He sort of throws out arguments that are really stimulating. Doesn't follow them all the way through. There might be objections that you want to raise or qualifications you want to make. He doesn't do any of these. And so they're head scratchers, right? You think like, wait a minute, I don't want to say any of this, but I didn't think I was saying any of this, right? Now it seems that I might be saying this. What's going on? Right? And so it's a stimulating book for that reason. Maybe you're saying any of this, and then you have a choice to make. All right. So you should just ask yourself whether these theories have these implications, whether you are saying these things. Forget about the second one for now. All right. Here's the lecture we were supposed to do today. I guess we're a little behind. Nozick on Rawls. So we'll do that today and Tuesday. Should get through that. I'm going to go through, just sort of review Nozick's arguments against Rawls, because he goes pretty fast in the beginning. He goes pretty fast here too. And so I want to review them. There's at least three types of arguments here. One is about social cooperation. One is about the difference principle per se, and then one is about the sort of general original position way of thinking. And we'll see some of the themes return. So, in turn. So here's a version of Rawls's argument, right? So if you remember, go all the way back to Rawls. Before we started looking at Rawls, we looked at Hume, and then we saw that Rawls accepts the way that Hume sets up the problem of justice, right? So the circumstances of justice, objective and subjective conditions. Objective, scarcity of goods, there's not enough stuff to go around, but we could produce enough so as to create prosperity, that there is enough to go around. But here's the subjective conditions. We're not well motivated, right? We don't work for others. We don't sacrifice ourselves for others all the time. So there has to be something in it for us, otherwise we don't work very hard. And that's the setup, and then you get... Hume says what you need is stability of possession, so people know that if they work something, they get something out of it. Rawls thinks this is why if we start with equality, you go away from equality because inequality incentivizes people to try and be more productive and work harder. That grows the pie, and so if we allow unequal slices, everyone stands to gain. That's the idea. So the point of justice is to overcome this objective and subjective circumstances, right? So if we don't cooperate, there's not enough for all of us to go around. But Rawls says if we do cooperate, then we can all have a good and decent life. He says, well, that creates the problem, right? Because we all want more when we think about how to divide the stuff that we create by cooperating. And so that's why we need to divide things between us. So social cooperation is necessary to overcome that. If done correctly, it's sufficient to. And so the point of justice is to facilitate cooperation and make it fair. This is sort of how Rawls thinks about it, right? So we have to cooperate to get out of this crappy situation into a good life. And we have to do that in a way that helps solve the problem in a fair way. That's what justice is about. So, well, what's the difference, right? The difference is this surplus. That's the extra stuff that gets produced. And so justice is about this fairly divided cooperative surplus. Helicopter view of Rawls's theory, right? Nozick jumps on this, right? You've just seen this, the first section on Rawls. He says, wait a minute, are you telling me that justice is just about cooperation and surpluses? And what should that mean? So he asks a couple of things. He asks, do we really think that cooperation is necessary for justice? And he asks, do we really think that the surplus is only what justice is about? This is two ways you can challenge. There's two big steps here, right? It's, hey, justice is about cooperation and justice is about the surplus. And so he challenges both. Am I going too fast? Okay. All right. So he wants to challenge this conclusion in 3 and, of course, also the one in 5. But for now, let's focus on the one in 3. This is that the point of justice is to facilitate social cooperation and make it fair. He says justice is not something that only appears when cooperation is possible. And so he asks you to imagine a kind of Robinson Crusoe type example, right? Like suppose that we have as many islands as there are people, right? Every person on their own separate island. And we can communicate. Imagine some type of radio system. Not clear where the radio system comes from, but there it is. So we can talk to each other, you just can't cooperate, right? Asks, does justice still apply? He thinks, yeah, of course, right? Like if you can hurt each other, it would be unjust to hurt each other. Oh, I don't know what that was, but one Robinson sent a missile to another Robinson. If you could do that, you shouldn't, right? So he thinks that shows it, because now we have no cooperation. We have no joint production or something. No market economy is going to happen. No exchange, no division of labor, right? All these things that you might think of as the stuff that creates this cooperative surplus. All these things are absent. Is justice still applicable? This isn't intuitive, right? He's gauging your intuitions. He says, hey, is the way that Hume and Rawls set this up, that cooperation is what creates the problem of justice, is that the right way? No, he thinks. Intuitively, it doesn't make any sense. He thinks justice is much more about what people are due just because they're individuals, self-owners, again, right? So it's a supposedly counterexample. For we deny 3, we also have to deny 1 or 2, right? So here's a question. How do you think Hume would respond? To Nozick, yeah. Nozick says, no, justice isn't about cooperation. It's something, something that applies whether we interact, cooperate or not. If there is some other planet of aliens that we discover, right, like light years away, you can't interact with them. but we can harm them, right? We could send a nuke their way. Nozick thinks it would be unjust to do that. But no cooperation, right? Think about it, right? Hume says, what is justice? Justice is the convention that appears between us, right? When we interact. Sort of, these are the rules that automatically we start following because they're all in the interest of everybody. Like two people rowing in the boat. Right? But that requires we have to be interacting first. We have to be in the boat together, right? So Nozick says there's these aliens elsewhere. Justice still applies. Can you think of how Hume might respond to this? No? All right. I'll let you think about it. It has something to do with Hume thinking that justice is artificial, not natural. But we can talk about that some other time. Or think about it. It's a good question to think about. Right. That's first, Nozick is attacking this idea that justice is about cooperation. He says, not so. Intuitively, not so. Here's the second part. Is it about the surplus? He says, well, we can ask, right? We have all the stuff in the world, right, consists of two things. It consists of the things that we would have without cooperation, small part, right? And then there's the surplus that we create with cooperation, big part. What is the playing field of justice? Like, what's the scope of justice? Is it just the surplus, or is it everything? The surplus plus we call it your individual endowment, right? The stuff that you begin with before you cooperate. What would Rawls say? You say the surplus? Why do you think just the surplus?
Isn't that what it said in the previous slide? Is that that's what everyone's working for, and that what justice was to create that surplus?
Yeah, and so Nozick is challenging this, right? Like he's saying.
So is he adding the individual endowment as well? That's kind of his.
So if we go back to Rawls, what's divided? Like what choice do we make in the original position? Like what are we choosing between? Do you remember? Numbers on a slide, but that's not.
Yeah.
We represent. So for Nozick, where we choose between in the original position, we choose between rules for society that lead to divisions of holdings, rights, duties, benefits, burdens. Right? Now this involves money, income. It involves things like access to certain positions, opportunities. It also involves things like your rights to free speech, your right to free conscience, your right over your person. In short, everything. So Rawls remember he says we have to assume that everything is on the table because otherwise there would be these arbitrary distinctions between us. I'm the strong NBA player body, like not me, but the imaginary me, right? Let's say I'm LeBron James, right? And if I know that I'm LeBron James going into the original position, I'm probably going to propose some type of rules that's going to be really good for the really athletic, right? Athletically gifted. Rawls says, can't have that. That's not fair. It's not impartial. So you don't know who you are. And so your bodily abilities, your talents, that's part of the negotiation, like how much you get out of those. So that's not just cooperative surplus, that's your cooperative surplus plus your individual endowment, right? And so if that's right, then the previous slide, the helicopter view, was really sort of we're being too kind maybe to Rawls, right? Because he's saying it's not just the cooperative surplus we're dividing everything.
It's saying you get to cut the pie and then choose the piece, I guess. Not just cut the pie. Is that kind of?
No, I'm not sure I'm following what you're asking.
Well, as far as like the individual endowment coming into play, like it's not just that you're like saying. Like,
oh yeah, so Rawls thinks that your individual endowment has to be on the table because otherwise it would be like that, right? Because you would know which piece was going to be yours, or you could choose your piece. It's just the same thing, right? Yeah. Okay. So, I don't know why there's a bracket there, but oh no, there it is. There. Okay, does make sense. So, yeah. So what is it? Everything. Well, in Rawls, it's everything, right? But now you have a dilemma. This is basically the one that you just raised, right? You have to choose. It seems like either you take the story, the motivation about the human circumstances seriously, that justice is about facilitating cooperation that makes the surplus possible. But then the story would be like what you originally thought. Well, then we have to talk about how we divide the surplus. Or you want to keep Rawls' scope of justice, which is everything is on the table. But now we need a different story about why we care, about like what the purpose of justice is. Right? Because if everything is on the table, then justice isn't simply about facilitating cooperation. That's roughly what's going on here. Rawls thinks that if we just look at the surplus, we're going to end up with an unfair division of the surplus, because some people, the more talented, are going to have a bigger claim on the surplus than others. Of course, Nozick would say that's not unfair. Right? That's just what it is to be a self-owner, that you get, if you're more productive or you're more talented, you get more. Next time we'll see, in Tuesday's readings, we'll see Nozick and Rawls discuss that very point. Right? Are your natural talents yours, or are these arbitrary in a way that should be denied or canceled out? Rawls thinks they should be canceled out. Nozick thinks you can't do that. In the first edition, Rawls said, our natural talents are a collective asset. He was honest. Right? He said, look, your talents, like LeBron James's talents, are collectively held assets. And he meant it. In the revised edition, he scrapped it. And he didn't say people that, he didn't announce that. And it seems a pretty significant phrase to scrap, but he didn't. One of his students called him out on it. It was Nagel did. Thomas Nagel was at NYU. He wrote a review of the revised edition. He said, there's something pretty big that's missing here. Readers should be told. But we'll see. One reason it didn't disappear from the collective memory is because we'll see Nozick gets on that. He has a section on collective assets. He thinks that's no way to honor people as individuals. He thinks treat them as collective assets. The same theme, right? Forced labor, collective assets. If these people are if rich people are there to be sort of for the taking to serve the needy, then why aren't the unemployed there also for the taking? Why aren't the foreigners also there for it? You see the same theme appearing through and through, right? All right. So the point here is just there is a disconnect here between the very encompassing theory of social justice that Rawls is proposing and the Humean motivation. Hume, of course, didn't go as far as Rawls did, right? Hume's idea of justice is just stability of possessions, and that's that. He thinks your individual, personal rights, those are part of your natural sentiments, your natural morality. That's part of our psychological setup, that we respect each other, and we don't kill each other and beat each other up and so on. What's artificial, what has to be created through convention, is justice about external possessions and goods. So these are very different. So he would cut the surplus off from the individual endowment. One is artificial, one is natural, and the same rules don't have to apply to either. They might not. But for Rawls, who wants to put everything on a pile, what if you put everything on a pile? I think Nozick is saying you need a different story about why everything is going to be on the table. And there's a cost. So, he's attacking this view, right, this social cooperation view at 2 points. He says, look, justice cannot just be about social cooperation, because there are still rights that we have and duties that we have even when we don't cooperate with each other. There are people who might live somewhere in Papua New Guinea or something, somewhere in the jungle, secluded from the rest of civilization. You still owe them whatever it is that justice requires, right? Nozick would say. It's not clear whether you can say the same on Rawls' theory. So that's one. He says it doesn't require cooperation. And second, he thinks, well, look, even Rawls himself doesn't take this cooperation theory sufficiently seriously. Because if he really thought justice was only about cooperation, then it would only be about the surplus, but it's not, it's about everything. And so has to be, justice has to come from somewhere else. We need a different motivation. So that's the first argument he gives. It's a very theoretical objection, right? Saying like the theory doesn't hang together well. Saying about Rawls. Here's a third possibility that he said also discussed very quickly, because I don't think it's all that important for us, but this will be the last essay. Nozick goes over a third way that what Rawls might mean with social cooperation. He says maybe what he means that social cooperation makes it the case that everything is on the table is that once we start cooperating, we can't figure out anymore like who contributed what. Right? Think about the following like analogy. Lots of people say like financial speculators on Wall Street. They don't add much to the economy, right? But they take a lot out, right? They're rich. So the idea is here, well, there's a big disconnect between how much they get paid and how much they put in. And, well, maybe then we should think if they get paid so much, maybe they put in much more. But then when we look at what they're doing, it just looks like they're rearranging numbers on the screen and sort of trying to jump on very short-term fluctuations in the market and capitalize on those. Turns out pretty hard to figure out what that contributes to the economy, right? Maybe that helps sort of more efficiently allocate financial resources and sort of spreads out as a wealth contribution in society. And so, well, maybe it really is not much of a contribution. I'm not confident about which is true, right? But if you're also not confident, then maybe it's not so easy to disentangle what they contribute. Maybe it's not so easy to disentangle what I contribute, right? So I tell you stuff about philosophy. Looks like not much of a contribution. I also write things about philosophy, so I tell people who happen to read the things that I write about philosophy. Still, not that much of a contribution. Right? I don't get paid nearly what the Wall Street people get paid, but I do make a salary, and it's like what I make. So, am I overpaid? Well, on the surface of it, yeah, right. But then, of course. Maybe below the surface also. Don't tell people. Don't tell your parents. But maybe when we dig deeper, all your lives are just tremendously enriched by having to do with me, and then you go off and you're all these way more productive people outside, and so there's my contribution, right? So maybe I'm underpaid. Who knows, right? Anyway, the point, so you might think this, right? Can't tell this apart. I might contribute more than the Wall Street people through all of you. Thank you. Right? So, but Nozick is not impressed by this. You know this. So Nozick says, no, this is BS. We're perfectly capable of disentangling contributions. You know what does it? The entitlement theory does it because it allows people to exchange. And we know from classical economics that when we have a fairly competitive market, people get roughly paid what their marginal contribution to the company is. And so it's a system, like a competitive system of exchange and prices, will nicely sort of tend towards, not perfectly, but tend towards people getting paid about what they contribute. Because that's about how much people are willing to pay for it when they have a choice. So that's BS, he says. We have a perfectly nice way available. It's my theory, and so that's if you don't like that, then you should go to me, he thinks. But stronger, he thinks even Rawls himself cannot accept this view, right? Because remember what we said earlier, we said Rawls thinks, why do we move away from equality to the difference principle where we have unequal slices of the pie? Well, because the pie grows as a result. Well, why does the pie grow? Well, the reason that Rawls gives is the fact that you might get a bigger slice incentivizes people to work harder. Right? But that means that the people who are incentivized to work harder are the people who are contributing more. Right? If you incentivize the wrong people, like the destructive instead of the productive, then the pie might shrink. Right? So you want to have the people who are actually contributing a lot work a lot. And Rawls accepts this, that this is perfectly possible. Right? Otherwise, the whole argument for the difference principle makes no sense. The argument for the difference principle assumes that we know who are the people who contribute a lot, and that by paying a lot, we get them to contribute more. A really, really good doctor makes a lot of money, and that's good news because that means they start working like 80 hours a week, because there's a lot of money to be made that way. So that means lots of people get access to that really good doctor. 80 hours worth of people instead of 40 hours worth of people. Good deal, right? So, but look what we're saying, right? That assumes, or else, that we know that doctor is the good one. That's the one that's actually adding a lot of health value to our society, and so you can't say that. Anyway. This doesn't really matter. This is more so like Nozick saying, well, here's a possibility, and he doesn't accept it for these two reasons. So, all right. Alive? Lots of Nozick. Lots of justice for you. Okay. Yes, exactly. We'll pick up on this next time, and then also discuss about arbitrariness and natural talents and so on. Have a good weekend. Enjoy the weather.